Welcome to the Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines, your host and podcast producer. This is a half hour of power, a podcast dropping every week where I unpack the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment, quality, and much, much more. Our guests are seasoned in the field or topic of their choice, even if you've not heard of them yet. This is a non-partisan show. So while I love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate of ideas, this is not a purely blue, white, green program. Please subscribe, tune in and enjoy the politics of everything. Welcome to the first episode of my 2023 season of the Politics of Everything. Today's topic is one close to my heart and, well, let's be honest, my business life. We are talking about the politics of media. My guest, Nic Hayes, knows the media game. He is a 20-year veteran of media with broad ranges of experience covering all aspects of the media cycle, from public relations, radio, TV broadcasting, and media intelligence to now providing Australia's media with content expert talent. Nic launched Media Stable in 2012 and he recognised there was an increased pressure for producers and journalists to actually come together. And there was a need for a different approach for businesses and experts to get their messages, stories and opinions in front of the media. Nic is a great connector and a true relationship builder, and the success of Media Stable has been built on the strong ties and contacts he has developed and nurtured along his 2 decades of media industry experience. The media landscape has changed so much in the past 2 decades, and what worked in 2003 is not likely to lead to coverage in 2023. However, some hard and fast rules still apply whenever we engage with journalists, producers and editors. So let's find out more. Welcome to the Politics of Everything, Nic.
Oh, Amber, thank you so much. And to be your first show for 2023, there's no pressure on me here, but I'm hoping it's going to be the best.
Yeah, I hope so too. Podcasting remotely can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be. Since day one of the Politics of Everything, I have relied on Zencastr's all-in-one solution to make the process quick and painless, the way it should be for those of us who just love great content and want to get our ideas out into the world. If you know me, I'm obsessed with quality in terms of my guests, my sound, and everything about my show has to be great the first time. I'm time poor. It's so easy to use Zencastr. I'm not tech savvy and you don't need to be either. There's nothing to download. Just click on the link and off we go. Zencastr is all about making your podcasting experience easy, and with everything from local recording to automatic post-productions now in their toolkit, you don't have to leave your browser to get that episode done, and done fast. I have a special offer for you, and hopefully you can experience what I have with Zencastr. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my VIP code, the Politics of Everything, all lowercase and one word, to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. How good is that? I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. So let's go back to young Nic as a kid. Did you want to be a journo or something when you were a kid? What did you think you might do when you grew up, and kind of did you do that thing?
I didn't. I had journalism, media wasn't even on the, that was not even looking out there at any outlook for me at all, really. I wanted to be a police officer, and that was, I thought, was my goal. I did get there. I joined the police force, Victorian Police Force, in 1995. I was in Squad 1 at the academy. But unfortunately, I only lasted 12 weeks because straight after we had just finished our exam week, the whole squad went out for a few drinks and I was a bit of a naughty boy that night.
Well, you let go.
So a little DUI incident, and I figured, you know what, Amber, I'm not quite right to be a police officer. If I'm doing this in the academy, then what am I likely to do when I get out? So, I gave up on that. But media was my secondary subject as part of my Bachelor of Arts. It was my minor. I was doing psychology at university, and I just loved it. It was the recording, the telling of stories, the different mediums, radio, television, and in the 90s, television and radio was everything. To us, it was just, it's where you got absolutely everything, and I loved being a part of it. And what quickly happened at university was I turned that minor into a major, and then that's where it all started.
Excellent. So when you started Media Stable a decade ago now, there was obviously that gap we mentioned in the introduction that you were trying to fill. I imagine you've had to sort of keep on your toes a bit though, because nothing's static in business, in life, in media. How has it changed over the past decade in your experience?
Oh, look, the media stable, the business that I created 10 years ago looks nothing like it does today. And I think anyone that's listening knows that when they first launch out their business and start it up, it's got to be changing. It's a forever moving machine that needs to adapt to the environment and to the requirements of your customers and your clients. And uh, originally, when we started Media Stable, the whole idea was to be just a directory that media could search up and find experts. In fact, I almost wanted it to be just myself and maybe another colleague running the show and thinking that this was it. This is it. No more, nothing more required. It would just be purely a directory. But what we found that people needed support, they needed help, they needed training. You know this better than anyone, Amber, the kind of work that's behind the scenes when you're creating and building stories for telling. It's enormous. And then there was the other element that we also too needed to support the media. And the media wasn't ever going to pay for this content, but it needed help because a lot of the producers, a lot of the journalists that were working 10, 15, 20 years ago, the numbers have got smaller. The financial support has got shorter as well. So there was a lot of people that needed help and support. So the first thing that we thought with Media Stable was just going to be purely a directory, but now it's a sort of an all-encompassing content creator, expert support, media training, right through to the introduction of content to media right across the country, and then also to a little bit of support for the aftermath after you've done the interview, amplifying those stories through your different networks. It's a very, very big machine now. It was nothing what I thought it would be from the very beginning.
Well done to making it to 10 years. I think what the average business is between 2 and 5 before people kind of, either exit or have to exit. So I think that's a big achievement in itself. I guess what I'd love to know is what are some of the hardest things about that 24/7 media cycle we're in, and we're of a similar vintage, Nic. And look, in the 90s when I was a journalist, for example, I filed my story at 2 or 3 o'clock the day before. I worked for what was then Fairfax newspapers, now 9 newspapers at the AFR. And really the next day that story came out, but I had to, go to the proofreaders, the sub-editors. Then it went out to the printing press in Chullora, and that newspaper came out the next day, and it was old news in some ways. And so, even though it was a bit stressful because we had harder deadlines, there was a filing deadline as a journalist, what it also meant was there was a bit of breathing space. And I suppose I see that has shifted completely. If we jumped on that, Sydney Morning Herald website or Nine News this morning, you would actually see different stories now than I would have at 5 a.m. when I jumped in, because the media cycle is always evolving and moving and breaking news is happening all the time. I'm curious to know that, the audience obviously demands how that's going to be curated and executed in the future. We're also doing less screen time now than we were, say, maybe a year or two ago when we were coming out of lockdowns. And you're in WA, so you had a lot of lockdown time there. I am feeling like people have a bit of, screen and content fatigue. So what are you thinking are some of the shifts that we see as we come into that, post-COVID, living with COVID world and the media?
It's that's a really strong question. I think that, and it's bringing out the crystal ball as to what it's going to look like. I think that the hardest thing about the 24/7 news cycle, and for both the consumer, is the amount of content that is out there. There is just so much news. There is so much information, and you'd go insane trying to consume it all. So I think that's one of the great challenges for the 24/7 news cycle, is that how does a media outlet still capture the attention of its audience? And let's remember that media is just serving its audience at all times, and it has been doing it from day one, and it will do it till the end of days. It's trying to make sure that it is still relevant and that it's trusted and that it's the kind of news that people need, not always necessarily want. And I think that's the biggest challenge there for the 24/7 news cycle, is how to keep up and how to make sure that it's still relevant to its audience. From an audience perspective, though, Amber, it's really one of those things where there is just so much competition for our ears, our eyes, and to take in all of that content that it is very much something that everyone has to take a conscious effort into actually working out, well, where will I get my sources of news? Where will I get my information from? And that 24/7 news cycle is basically telling everyone, look, we will tell you as it's happening. And a little different, obviously, back to the days when you were working there, Amber, that one story that you'd file away and it's locked away and done, that's job done. No, the journalists today, they are up first thing in the morning until they jump into bed, monitoring and keeping an eye on what is happening around the world so that they can be and have to be a part of the 24/7 news cycle. You miss the story, you're out. You no longer become valid or relevant because that is old news. That's yesterday's news. And the platforms that we've got at the moment are really making it a very hard task for journalists. But also, too, Amber, you'll remember too, and you still have this in you, is that you also have an appetite to be a news teller, a storyteller, and staying on top of this thing is not just necessarily work. It's what's inside you. It's part of who you are. The very DNA as a journalist is to want to tell the story and be the first to tell it. So that does make it quite exciting for journalists out there and for media out there to work with it. But look, I think as challenges go, and for the fact that we are probably not as tied down to it as we were during the COVID period. You look back at the COVID period, 3AW, Ross and Russell almost scored 30 points for radio ratings, which is just phenomenal considering, they are at the highest level of 2021 at the moment, and that's record breaking anyway at that. But to be 30 points, we were going to traditional media, radio, television, print, and online media for our news and information. And that, I think, is probably something there that media can feel very proud that sometimes they are competing against all of the online, the social media platforms, but we still go back to them. We still go back to the traditional media and that 24/7 news cycle to find out what's real news so that we can work out what's fake.
And that's an interesting point. I think a lot of people, particularly, and I don't want to be too generational about it, but there is a bias, I suppose, that, a younger cohort of audiences, if you like, they trust sources which we would see as unvetted, as moving into the land of, bloggers or influencers, which is all great and has a place. But I always try and explain to people, journalism has a different standard. You're working to a code of ethics. You may not agree with the story that's being told or the angle that's been taken, because there is, of course, inherent bias in lots of ways in which media is presented from, a channel point of view. You get left-wing and right-wing, newspapers and radio shows and all the bits in between. But at the end of the day, that has been verified. That source exists. It's not just hearsay. And I think that's the value of media, which people maybe are coming back to because we had to rely on that during COVID, for example. For us in New South Wales, the 11 a.m. press conference was kind of like compulsory viewing. It reminded me of being a kid and hearing the 9 News 6 o'clock music and running to the living room to see Brian Henderson. Like, it was that level of command. And I think that's the power which media still has.
I totally agree with you. And I think, your point around younger people taking in news from their other platforms, that's the challenge that media has today, is that they've got to win their trust. They've got to win the fact that it is highly competitive, and a younger audience isn't necessarily going to take in what they're being told. They're going to look, they're going to search, they're going to find. We were all young ones, Amber. We know what that's like. And, when they buy their first car and buy their first house and et cetera, then they very quickly revert back to traditional media and news because that's the trusted place to go. But we were all, looking for different means and different forms of communication and to get news in a different way. But that is one big challenge. I think that, traditional media and its position, it has had a renaissance period during the COVID pandemic and also too during any sort of major crisis that might be going around the country. We don't go to Facebook to find out what's going on. We go to the trusted sources. We chuck on 2GB to find out what's going on, listening to Ben Fordham, 3AW, Neil Mitchell, or, we go to the major mastheads around the country to read because they've got the 4 pillars of journalism. We know that there's bias. Bias is everywhere, but we also know that they've got a responsibility and they are also regulated too.
That's the thing. It's not just opinion, because I know I'm fatigued of, echo chambers of opinion. And I think it has a place, but it's exhausting, and sometimes it doesn't allow you to challenge what your own thoughts are and, where you get, if you like, the facts that you need to make informed decisions.
Spot on. Spot on. And those echo chambers, I think that, social media has been called out big time on all of this. That's where the influencers, that's where the people that are running around that might, they might have a position. Is it the right one? Question that. But again, it's intelligence. The audience at the other end has to have all of the facts in front of them and be able to make that right kind of decision and go with their particular lifestyle, go with their particular view, as long as they've got all the facts there. And I don't necessarily think you get that through social media. Traditional media, far more of it. You've got a lot more chances of being able to formulate a very strong opinion or position with the facts and news around you. And I'm all for that. I'm all for everyone having a say and having a position. But I think sometimes on social media, there's a lot of loud voices from those that potentially shouldn't have had a voice in the first place.
So just focusing a little bit on social media, I mean, a lot of people have, preferred channels and preferred people they follow and all those sorts of things. It does interrupt that media source and that authority, perhaps the fourth estate that traditional media always played, if you like, in our society. Do you think it can also complement it, or are they really different beasts? What's your sort of view on the interplay between how social media works? Noting, of course, major news organisations also have their own social media. They tweet, they put things on Facebook, they do all that stuff as well.
Oh, they do, and they see it as a very important part of what they do today, and I think that's critical. Amber, I love social media. I think it's one of the greatest discoveries that we've had in the last 20 years, where the ability to share and to bring an international community into a very small backyard. It's such a great opportunity to share some wonderful stories and do some amazing things. I truly do love it. But it has its dark side and its negative side as well. And I think it also, too, does get hijacked by those that have a position or a view that might not make and would be very much filtered out, for instance, for traditional media, because, that news isn't necessarily actually newsworthy, or it might have a very negative, dark tone to it that is trying to put down a person's beliefs or religious beliefs, or it's become racist, etc. It's just that kind of thing that it just doesn't have a filter. Traditional media has that, but
yeah, the filter's a really important piece of it, I think.
I think it's critical, and I think, look, younger people might be taken in by the social media platforms, the TikToks, the Instas, and all of the kind of things that Snapchat that is running around, and they're using that.
They're so shiny and instant. I think that sort of speaks to the generation that we're talking about.
But that was us too, Amber. That was us as well.
I just forget. I feel like I was never young. No, I don't really. I'm young at heart. I promise.
We were the first generation to get mobile phones. We were playing Snake on our mobile phones. We weren't watching videos from influencers in the United States trying to flog us coffee beans or the like. It's no, you know what? It's just us. It's just developing. But I think that the shiny things do take away. They go away as we mature and become far more settled as humans, and we seek the truth. And we don't necessarily just want to be sitting there watching screens and being entertained with mindless TikToks. It's definitely an age thing, but that maturity does come into people's lives, and we seek that out. But we always are, I think, as human beings, just seeking out the truth anyway.
What trends in media are you seeing at the moment? Being the beginning of the year, I think people like to have, a bit of an idea perhaps of some media goals or some ideas that, we know what sort of has worked in the past, but what are you seeing at the moment that might actually shape maybe not just this year, but the next couple of years in media?
Oh, great question. And I love this because we're always watching the different trends that are running around. So during COVID, you would have noticed that a lot of television, a lot of media, very much where we are watching, there was a lot of crosses, whether it be via Zoom, all the other different platforms, where even what we're doing here right now, using technology, doing it from home, doing it off-site. We could do it anywhere. If you're running around with a mobile phone, you're almost a studio and a media house yourself. And we're going to see less of that moving forward because the quality of media is returning. And I think that's the big thing for everyone that is even involved in social media, traditional media. it's one thing to put content out there, but the difference is the quality of it. So at Meet the Media, for which you were at last year with us, Amber, a lot of television people were telling us, that's the end of the cross via Zoom. You'll be needed to come into the studio.
Thank goodness. I have to tell you, I didn't want to see anyone's pot plants coming out of their head, looking up their nose, or bad lighting.
What?
See, old media people never really stop looking at those things.
We don't. And it did create some humorous pieces where, children walking in the middle of international news stories, or, cats and dogs coming in and interrupting an interview. But we did that out of necessity, and that's probably the beautiful thing about media, is that it adapts with everything that goes on, and it wants to bring the story. But we're going to see less of that for sure. I think we're also going to see a lot more media playing a bigger role in the traditional media in the social media forums. They already do. They're on, as you said, they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, but they're going to play a bigger role there. I suspect that they're watching how their audiences are consuming content, and they've seen where they're getting it from, but they're going to play even a bigger role moving forward. And because that's the number one thing about traditional media, they are looking to service the very audience that they have, and they'll do anything to do that. And sometimes they'll do it even to the detriment to their own story, but they will get there, and they'll play a bigger role in social media.
What's your favourite media type and why? Or is that kind of like choosing favourite children? You can't really do it.
Well, look, I've got two children. I do have a favourite, Amber, but I won't say it on the podcast. No, I love...
It's whichever one sleeps in the most, I've decided.
Look, I love all forms of media. I love all forms of communication. But if I was to pick my favourite, it's radio. I think...
Well, perfect for today.
It is. And, we have the absolute pleasure of being in the ears of your listeners today, and I don't take that for granted. I think the fact that you're telling a story, you're walking them through just the form of audio, and to be able to listen in and find out and get a sense around that, I just think that's one of the most powerful tools. The fact that you can do it whether you're going for a run, for all those people going for a run right now, well done you. But if you're going into work, you're driving home from work, or you're going out to get the shopping and you're listening to this podcast, you can do it while you're doing other things. And that's the beauty of it. And look, I think talkback radio particularly is the very first form of social media. It's where conversations and opinions and position are sort of belted out there. And I think it's very entertaining, it's very informative, and incredibly powerful.
How do you advise people to measure their kind of return on investment when it comes to media? I mean, back in the old days, when I worked in PR agencies, you'd have your advertising equivalent, which doesn't really mean much these days in a very disrupted media advertising landscape. What do you say to people? Is it about your downloads? Is it about your eyeballs? Is it about converting that into business success? And I'm going to give you the example where I've had clients who they have got so many followers on a particular platform of social media and they've not made one sale. Yeah. And it's like, what is that? Like, what a waste of your time. But it takes time. It's like, but how much money and effort and time are you putting into creating this content? What's your measure for media success?
So there is no exact measure. So anyone that's trying to say that this is what you should be measuring against, it's all very subjective. Everyone's going to have different goals and different aims. My big one is, and I think the greatest reward you get from engaging the media and being a media asset, an expert, a commentator, is when you do walk into a room, someone you've never met, they seek you out, or they come to you and say, I loved your position in the Sydney Morning Herald. I love what you wrote about this topic. I loved what you had to say on 2GB or on 5AA or 6PR. That is the greatest compliment I think you can get, because what you've actually created there is trust. You have created a position there as an authority, and you have someone that is commenting on your words, not on someone else's. So I think that's the first sign of success, the first measurement that you can say that you've given a bit of ROI there. Look, sure, we want sales, we want to expand our businesses, we want to get lots more click-throughs, etc. And we want to make more money. But at the end of the day, I really truly believe if you are engaging media, if you are keen to be an expert in it, it's more about establishing trust and authority as that expert in your space. And when people know that, they are going to be your best assets. They're going to be your promoters. They're going to be your amplifiers. So to me, that's a measure of success. That's what you're looking for.
Comes down to trust, which is kind of what we've been talking about throughout this conversation today, I think.
Absolutely.
So changing tack a bit, I always mix up my questions every season. I'm going to question 8. You're my first guinea pig for this one. What is the best advice you were ever given and why?
I've been given much advice, Amber, much advice across my 25 years in business, and I still think my absolute number one best piece of advice comes from my father. And I still remember him saying this to me. He just said, Nick, never be afraid to ask for what is rightfully yours. And I think that just applies across everything, whether someone hasn't paid their bill or whether you're seeking out particular content or information or anything along those kind of lines. It just says never be afraid, never doubt yourself. Because I think in business, when you're starting out, you're not a professional or expert in anything. In any small business, you're the accountant, you're the legal advice, you're the mentor, you're the guide, you're the CEO, you're everything. And I just think it just reminds me, never be afraid and never question yourself. If it's a gut feel, go and do it. Go and ask for it. Go and make sure that it is yours and do it. So that's always been my best advice. And the other one also, can I share another one with you?
Oh, you can sneak another one.
Another one quickly from my mentor, Peter Maher, from my media monitoring days. Always surround yourself with good people and good things will come.
Absolutely. That's great. Life advice, really. If we spoke again in a year's time, what would be your number one goal to have achieved and why?
To have dropped 12 kilos, Amber. And
personal goals. That's good.
Yeah, well, personal health goals. Look, I think COVID sort of threw us around a little bit, didn't it? So I did chuck an extra couple of kilos on, and I would like to get back into some of my older suits. But look, I think personally, building and continuing to develop the Media Stable brand. As I'm speaking to you now, I'm in South Australia. I've just opened an office here only this week. And
You're in Radelaide.
I'm in Radelaide. And so we are now in Radelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth. Coming to you, Brisbane. Yes, we are. And
and maybe overseas for any of my listeners that are overseas.
Well,
we
overseas,
do have about
UK.
20% of people from overseas dialing in.
Well, watch out for the UK because it's coming, and we're already in discussions over there as well. So it's exciting. I love it. I
feel like global domination's the goal.
Well, maybe not just global, but maybe a good part of Europe and owning Australia is my big thing.
Excellent. Final takeaway message for us today on the politics of media as we wrap up our conversation.
Be a part of the media. Whoever you are who's listening today, don't be afraid. Get yourself up there. Become a media asset. Represent your brand. Represent yourself. But give back. The more you give in media, more will come back. And that might be the answer to your return on investment. But be available. Be the media asset. And don't be afraid. It's probably one of the great experiences that you'll ever have because you're going to become part of your industry, part of the future, the thinking of what your business and industry is going to. And media is such a great platform for that. Just be a part of it.
And it's lots of fun. People often don't believe me when I'm doing media train. They're going to have a fun day, but it's a lot of fun, isn't it, Nick?
Oh, it is so much fun. It is so much fun. And Amber, when we get to do another Meet the Media, you get to see how much fun it actually is because the media love this as well.
Yeah, that's it.
We don't feel like we worked a day in our lives when you're working in the media, and you can come and be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, if you do want to connect further with Nic Hayes and find out more about Media Stable, there will be some details on the show notes. Until next time, take care. Thanks so much, Nick.
Thanks, Amber.
If you're interested in investing in the future of podcasting, I have an opportunity which might interest you. Zencastr has been my platform of choice since I began recording the politics of everything in 2017. They now have an opportunity to join in their crowdfunding action. So I want you to jump on and have a look at wefunder.com/Zencastr. That is wefunder.com/Zencastr and see if this is an opportunity which might interest you. What I love about Zencastr is you can record, produce, host, analyze, and monetize all in one platform. I think it's a great chance for you to have a look at if this something might interest you. If you want to invest, jump on. Thanks so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed the politics of everything, I thrive on your feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network through Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects. I'm always on the hunt for new and diverse guests, so if you or someone you know has a fresh idea you're busting to get out there, please email me at amber@amberdanes.com and my crew will get back to you very soon.